Last week we talked about how it begins, but this week, let's talk about how it ends. We are moving through our podcasting housekeeping series because it is August and there's no better time to check in on your show than today. So, we're going to walk through what an audit of your outro can look like, how to improve it, how to make it better, how to make sure your listeners are moving forward because that is the goal. Welcome to the More Profitable Podcast with Stacey Harris. I'm Stacey, and this is the spot to learn more about the strategies, tactics, and tools you need to build your more profitable podcast. My team and I work every day with podcasters like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of your sales team, because your show should be built to generate and convert leads. So let's get into it. I want to jump right in on this because we set up so much of this when we talked last week about intros that let's move right into the outro. It's so easy. It's really easy to, when you launch your show or when you refresh your intro, to record an outro and say, nobody ever listens to that. It doesn't really matter. And you're kind of right. Very few people statistically are going to make it to the very end of your episode. But that's why it's important, not why it's not important. Because for the folks moving all the way through and listening to the end of your episode, those are your warmest leads. Those are your most engaged listeners. And when we don't put effort into telling them where to go next, they'll choose a destination on their own. And I don't know about you, but when left unsupervised, I almost never end up someplace helpful. And we want to make sure that they're moving where they need to go. When we were talking through our intro last week, we were talking about the podcast sort of being a highway and them only being able to get where they want to go by getting off the highway. Our outro is that off ramp. We need to make sure that their off ramp delivers them to a place that is useful, that is their actual destination. And like last week, we're going to talk about a pre-recorded outro. You hear it in this show where I sort of go through, hey, if you made it to this point in the episode, for realsies, let's have a conversation. And I ask you to rate and review the show and things like that. I'm going to call that a catch-all outro. It is the outro that I recommend always exist, but it's kind of like, if nothing else, do these things. Again, your rating and your review. This is a great place to put a newsletter opt-in that is sort of your general opt-in. For me, that's the podcast newsroom. So that's what I talk about there, because regardless of what you heard in the episode, that's going to be helpful. But that's not the only part of our outro that I want to talk about today, because part of our outro is also our call to action. And that's the part that I don't think we talk enough about. And I'm going to spend probably most of our time talking about, because it's where we're really moving people from this episode into a next step. Because that, again, live read, the thing that's not pre-recorded, that is where we're going to move them directly from the content into an action. I think the best place to start is probably with the job of our outro, which, much like our intro, can vary depending on what's happening with that show, right? We talked about, when we were talking about doing the audit for the intro, looking at different episode types, and that's because different episodes do different things, right? So we want to make sure that the outro is doing its job. That's one of the reasons why this has to be a bigger conversation than just the pre-recorded one, because that live read outro is going to be the one that is more adjustable. And if you frequently have different kinds of episodes, it might be worth recording more than one pre-recorded outro. Let me give you an example. When we first launched the Uncommonly More agency and started working with clients for podcast production, we didn't work with any clients who didn't have an existing show. So I didn't do any launch strategy. I didn't offer launch production services. We only worked with pre-existing shows. Now, several years later, that's changed. We work with launch clients a lot. We have at least a couple of shows we launch every single year. In fact, it has now become one of the more common ways to start working with us, is we launch the show and then that show moves into ongoing production with us. That's happened with every show we've launched. And so we now have episodes that are geared towards clients who are launching, and we have episodes that are geared towards people who already have an existing podcast and are maybe looking for a different partner. And then we have shows that are just about podcasting in general, and it's going to be helpful for any kind of podcaster. So it could, in theory, and one of the things I will do this month when I do the work I'm walking you through here is I will decide, is it time to have a second version of my pre-recorded outro? Because we have a new launch opt-in specifically for launch clients. We are looking at another opt-in we're developing that will launch probably in the next 12ish months that is geared towards existing podcasters and how they generally start working with us, or why they generally start working with us. And so it could be really helpful for me to have two pre-recorded outros, one that goes on episodes that are geared for launch and one that goes on sort of all my other episodes, right? Ones that sort of fit both audiences and ones geared only for folks with an existing show. That doesn't change the fact that my live read outro still needs to be geared towards that topic, even if I pre-record separate ones, because I want to make sure that I am tying my call to action, which is what I'm going to call the live read. I want to make sure that I am really connecting that with the content. I don't want there to be a jarring and now a sort of ad read. And so as you're auditing this and as you are looking at your show and you're making decisions around what you need or how many of these you need, keep that in mind for your own show. Do you need to have separate pre-recorded outros? Do you want to do away with a pre-recorded outro and only have your call to action and have a call to action that you know includes things like leave a rating and review, join the email list? That's up to you. But I want you to keep in mind, first and foremost, what does your outro need to be doing? And again, start thinking about your call to action as part of the off ramp of your episode, but separate from that pre recorded outro, because you do need both. You have to have both of those pieces. So let's talk first about calls to action. I have a full episode of this show around calls to action, and I'm going to include that in the show notes for this episode. And we talk a lot about different kinds of calls to action and how to do calls to action. We even talk about sort of where different calls to action may fall in an episode. For our purposes today, we're just going to be talking about that last one right before it goes out. So for me, this is a episode specific offer based call to action, meaning I am promoting the offer that best matches the content I talked about in this episode. Notice I said the offer that best matches. That does not mean I should be ending my show by listing the 9 different ways you can hire me. That's not helpful. You know that old cliche that runs around the internet year after year that a confused mind says no? It's a real thing. Sometimes cliches are based on fact, only some of the time. But this one is. This is where we need to know what offer that content was intended to sell. Now, you might be saying, but Stacy, all of my offers essentially sell the same thing, which means most of my podcast episodes could go into any one of my offers. Just depends on where they're at. Hey, love, that's true for me too, right? I actually only sell one thing. I just sell it in different containers, right? The Profitable Podcast Launch Accelerator is for somebody who doesn't yet have a show, who wants sales and marketing focused podcast strategy and production. They just don't have a show yet. Podcast production services with Uncommonly More are sales and marketing focused podcast strategy and production just for a show that already exists. They're the same offer, but they're for different people, and so they live in different containers. And obviously, there's nuance, right? There's stuff we're doing in a launch that we have to do because it's a launch. and there's things that we do in ongoing production because the show has existed for a while. There's some things we got to make sure we're cleaning up, right? But if I ended every episode with you could do this or you could do this, now you're so focused on choosing the right thing that you're not paying attention to what I'm saying. You're not paying attention to understand why this is right for you. So one of the things I'm going to recommend to you on above anything else is to know what that call to action is when you build your episode. This is not going to surprise you at all. I start offer first. What do I need to promo? What am I selling with this episode? Cool. What is the question what is a question, not necessarily the question, a question somebody has when they want that? Cool. That's the episode content. Now, this is a very simplified version of what our planning process looks like. But because I am thinking offer back, it makes it really easy for me to naturally say, if this was relevant for you, if this hit a nerve, if you're struggling with, let's have a conversation. Let's figure that out. You're going to hear me do it at the end of this episode. You heard me do it at the end of the last episode. You hear me do it at the end of every episode. That's what I want to be hearing on your show too. And we do that by really flowing from the content into this call to action really seamlessly. It's not, and now I'm going to sell to you. There's not music behind it. There's not a big break. It's natural. It's if you would like to have somebody else helping keep your eyes on these things that you don't need to be paying attention to every day, but you do need to be paying attention to every 6 months or once a year, that's where a production partner is helpful. So reach out to me and let's talk about how the team and I at Uncommonly More can help you get your podcast produced so that it's a real marketing and sales asset in your business. Do you feel how that didn't feel like it came out of nowhere? In the course of talking about what we've been talking about, I've built up enough expertise, I've built up enough trust that I could say, hey, I can help you with this. You don't have to do this alone, which is so often like the most important thing somebody needs to hear, right? You don't have to do this the hard way. I'm here. I can help carry this with you. I can help you make this decision. I can help you figure out this strategy. I can help you implement this strategy. I can help provide you line of sight. I can help you clean up whatever your finances are if you're a bookkeeper. I'm trying to think of different, but whatever those things are, you're just saying, hey, I can help. I know this was a lot. I can help. As you sit down to audit, and like last week, I want you to audit 3 to 5 episodes of your show. Again, do varying types of episodes with different offers. If you just came out of a launch and your last 5 episodes were all selling the same thing, that's not going to be super helpful. Choose 2 of those. Choose 2 episodes that promote your sort of primary offer. And don't forget, if you have solos and guests, I want to have some variety in there. Because frankly, I find guest episodes are the ones people drop the ball on this the most often. Especially if you have a guest expert on, we got to bring it back to you. We got to bring it back to why they talk to you. And so in an outro for a guest episode where I've had a guest expert on, I'm going to have a longer outro that is a live read, that's not pre-recorded, that is not just me saying, and if this was helpful for you, let's talk about, but is also me landing them back in I'm an expert mode. And so I'm saying things like, that was really incredible how so-and-so was talking about how this podcast tool helped them get what they needed out of their show. This is all made up, but stay with me. So it's going to get messy probably. These are the kind of decisions we help our clients address when we're in production with them, because it can be overwhelming to be looking at these things when it's not your expertise, when it's not what you're doing every day, when you're making 1,000 other decisions for every day. And if you're like a lot of my clients, you're probably spending a lot of your time not just making decisions for you, but helping your clients make decisions. That fatigue builds up. Sit down with somebody you can trust. I'd love to be that person, and think through this. That might be most helpful to do in a podcast strategy intensive, in a 1 hour call with me, whatever the offer is there, right? So I want you to, when you audit, look at your solos and look at your guests, because the solo ones tend to be easier to tie in, right? Flat back, 2 minutes ago, and I just did one that made total sense for an outro for a solo. When you have a guest, you may need to land some more content plane before you get into that firm call to action. All right. When you look at your sort of what sits in your pre-recorded versus your live read stuff should be anything that is super relevant to that episode. Your evergreen stuff can almost be what I'm going to call a downsell, but it really is and here's other offers, right? It is leave a rating and review, join the email list. If you have one sort of signature program, maybe that you include that there. That's sort of evergreen. I see this a lot for clients who have done for you services or done with you services. And then they also have like a membership or a self-study programs that are sort of available all the time. They're live unless it is built to sell that membership or one of those self-study programs is almost always going to be their done with you or done for you stuff. And then in that pre-recorded outro, there's promo for like their membership or their signature self-study program as this might also be helpful. I would not frame it or language it as this might also be helpful. I would just let them know it is available. What I want to be clear about though is that we're not listing every service we have. So you want to, when you're going through your audit, you're going to want to make sure you don't have 19 requests here. Email me, send me a message, follow me on Instagram, rate and review the show, sign up for this program. Also, we have this program. Also, we have this self-study thing. Also, we have this event we do. That's too many choices. And again, the cliche is true. A confused mind says no. And so what I recommend having in that pre-recorded outro, something that's just for you, a way for them to show appreciation. That's that rating and review. That might be uh, buy me a cup of coffee, subscribe to a Substack, whatever those things are. Patreon, whatever those things are for you. One, free, win-win. So sign up for the email list, join the private podcast, that kind of thing. Private, free online community, that kind of thing. And one paid thing, self-study course, your signature offer, something like that. I would recommend not having any more than those three things, because you got to remember, you also have whatever that episode specific call to action was. So we want to make sure that we don't just end up on a listicle of options. So check those as you're doing your audit. When you're actually listening, don't determine what should stay and what should go. I want you to just make note of how many asks you're making. Because sometimes this can be really enlightening, because you'll get to the end of the episode and you'll go, wait, I didn't make one ask that whole time. That's a problem. And other times you'll be like, wow, I asked for everything. Even I don't know what some of those things are. And they're my things. It can get really, really easy to fall into one of those two extremes. What I want you to do as you're auditing is to make sure that we are sort of streamlining this in a way where we're only checking those boxes we need to check. So one free sort of appreciation-y thing for you. One win-win, so it's a free thing, but they get stuff. And one paid offer. All right? I want you to take some time this week to look at those last few minutes of 3 to 5 episodes. Remember to choose different ones if you have different types of episodes. I want you to make note of every action you ask your listener to take. I want you to look at how long this outro lasts, because if we're doing 10-minute episodes, we cannot have a 6-minute outro. If we're doing a 20-minute episode, it cannot be 10 minutes of call to action and outro. It's got to be in relation to how long that episode is. And there are going to be times where it's longer and times where it's shorter. I get that. It needs to be sort of connected to reality of what is happening in the episode. I want you to look at whether there was a call to action that connected with the actual content, not just the list of next steps in your pre-recorded outro. And I want you to really make sure that anything you're asking them to do in your live read, but especially in that pre-recorded, is still a priority in your business. Again, this is the place where I find folks will drop a evergreen course or program that they have in there, and it turns out that even if it still exists, it's not their best seller. It's not the best first step, not the best first buy, whatever that is for clients. And so it just kind of gets ignored. Or it's only relevant to a very small section of their audience. And so it's not really a priority for them in their business because it's not something that leads to other business or leads to recurring clients. We want to make sure whatever is being promoted is still a business priority. The opt-ins are also where this gets bad because you're promoting an opt-in that you built that doesn't even connect to any of your offers anymore. I saw this in an audit I did recently. It's incredibly common. So we got to make sure it is still tied to our business priority. Like I said earlier, because I modeled this for you, this is the kind of thing we keep an eye on with our clients inside of our podcast production services. So if you want to have a buddy, you want to have another set of eyes on the big picture strategy and not just the week to week of getting your show out, you want to be partnering with a production agency who can help you keep eyes on those things. I would love to talk to you about what working with Uncommonly More looks like. Head over to uncommonlymore.com/podcast production, and you can book a time for you and I to connect and talk more about what this can look like for you. All right? I will see you right back here next week. We're going to talk about more great stuff. We're going to keep auditing our show. Make sure you're ready for that, though, by doing what you need to do from this week and auditing that last few minutes of your more recent episodes. All right? I'll see you here next week. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember that content consumption does not make changes. So commit to doing something from today's episode. Maybe it's taking action on what we talked about. Maybe it's reaching out to me and learning more about podcast strategy intensives or what podcast production looks like with our team. All of that is over at uncommonlymore.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, I want to remind you that is a great next step. If you're not really sure what comes next, hang out over there. Get those exclusive private episodes. That's over at podcastnewsroom.com. And the last favor I will ask, because social proof is endlessly important for sure, is to leave a rating or review for the show. If you go to ratethispodcast.com/more, that's the easiest way to do it. But I would love to hear what you thought of the show, what you think of the show, and if the show has been helpful for you. I can't wait to chat with you. So this is just the start of the conversation. Reach out so we can keep it going. Talk soon.